upon other human beings, I think it's a disgusting thing to do, because hell is that 15-year-old girl with no legs and her parents were dead.
Well, hell
is you see her crying her eyes out, begging to die. That is hell. And I don't think you should genuinely wish hell on anyone, Israel or Palestinian, anyone. I'm a humanist. I don't want anybody to die.
Well, he did.
When he was wishing hell on an entire population,
he did express regret for the way he phrased it.
And he should,
and
because it's disgusting. I've not wished hell on the Israelis. I've not wished hell on the Israeli state. I don't want any Israeli civilian to go through what that 15-year-old Palestinian girl's going through. Not a single one.
He said about you, Jordan Peterson, I'm not particularly happy to be grouped with Andrew Tate. I think there are some elements about what he does that are quite reprehensible.
I'm sure he has. I don't know everything he says, and he may disagree with some of my points of view. As I said, I have nothing against him. I don't think anything he says is particularly wrong. I think that he's hypocritical because of the antidepressant problem, and I think that the fact he wishes hell on other humans because he gets emotionally involved in a conflict, which within 2 minutes of it sparking off, he's wishing genocide. I think that says a lot about his personality. But
especially wishing hell on people that actually belong there. That's crazy.
Overall, when he speaks at length, a lot of the things he says are pretty well thought through and pretty constructive. I have nothing against the guy.
Let me turn to Ben Shapiro. So let me assure you, as someone who's not pimped women and bragged about it, the morality requires that those who rape women and kidnap women must be eradicated, not negotiated with. He says on my show, I won't be lectured on morality and toughness by Andrew Tate. His great idea of toughness and morality is pimping women and bragging about it on air, and then trying to quasi-walk it back while simultaneously maintaining many of the same positions and flexing his biceps. Listen, everyone should be able to tweet whatever it is they want. I'm all for an open discourse, even with people who I think are dead wrong on a lot of issues. But Andrew Tate is dead wrong on a lot of these issues. And the particularly ridiculous posturing about being yes, you're very tough when you want people to make peace with terrorists who just murdered their children. Very, very tough. What do you say to that?
So Ben is a warmonger. Ben has been wrong on basically every single issue you can name. He was with you with the vaccine and every other war. Ben is always calling for other people's young men to go and die in some war. He seems to love it. I don't know if he has short man syndrome, but he's always behind his desk calling about how important it is that big, strong men like me go and die. And the reason he tweeted that and said that is because when Hamas and Israel, very early in the conflict, I think it was 3 days in, were discussing possible peace talks, he tweeted, no, absolutely not, fuck them, kill them all. And I said, wow. I said, Ben, as a man who's done his own fighting, because I've had a life of pain and violence, listen to me. Peace is always worth a conversation. What I said is that we should always be prepared to at least discuss peace. He, because he's a warmonger, said, no, peace is not worth a conversation. You're this, you're that, because he's always sitting behind his desk. He must have a booster chair, and he's always running his mouth trying to invoke violence and call for war. And I find it kind of hypocritical, because a man who's so small he would die if he was slapped on the street, sitting behind a desk and screaming for other people to be annihilated, I think is kind of, it's worse than
I believe,
it's insane.
I believe if he was sitting here listening to this, he would say that what he's screaming for is for Jewish people in Israel to defend themselves. And he's a Jewish man.
All Ben does is call for war. And I agree. Defending yourself.
That's not all he does.
That's all he does. And calling for war and defending yourself is very different than genocide. And Ben, like I said, overall, most of Ben's worldviews and mine probably align. We don't align on the religious sect. We don't rely on the religious points. Fine. But our overall worldviews about how society should function probably align on many of the key issues. I don't have a beef with Ben, and I don't watch his show, and I have no idea what he talks about a lot of the time. But what I do know is every time I turn it on, he's calling for someone else's son to go and die in a ditch somewhere for his interests. And I don't like people who are not advocates for peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, said Ken Tate, who's far more intelligent than Ben will ever be. And she is completely right. He replied that rhetoric, starting an argument with me, when I said we should talk about peace. I say we should talk about peace. He calls for the death of civilians.
You know, that's a very interesting point. I mean, look at what he just quoted Jesus, just in case you guys don't know. Blessed are the peacemakers. Now think about that. A person that's advocating for peace, how can you have any issue with that? I mean, he's quoting Jesus. So if Jesus was here and advocating for peace, would people have issue with him too? The answer is probably yes. Matter of fact, the answer is an emphatic yes. I'm sure many people would have issues with Jesus today. But I mean, why is it that when we are talking about peace, this is what it is, right? People just can't stand Andrew Tate. Period, point blank. I've already discussed this at length in the previous video. But people can't stand Andrew Tate because he is more conservative in his mindset and he is more biblically aligned, even though he's Islamic. And I have nothing against Andrew as a person. But what's my point? Anybody with actual traditional, moral, biblical values are going to be demonized in society today. Because again, how can you find fault with what this man is saying? I don't want them to go to war. Oh no, you don't know what you're talking about. You think Hamas is a force for good. Mind you, those never came out his mouth. I mean, these people just sound utterly ridiculous.
And somehow we're asking why my point of view is seen as abstract. It's insane. Why can't we all just sit down and say the fighting must end? Why can't we do that? Why can't we sit and say, nobody should be dying. Let's stop using the most advanced military weaponry on the planet to blow the limbs off children. Why can't we say that without being deemed some kind of terrorist sympathizer or anti-Semite? It's insanity. Trump came along and didn't start a single war. He's the only one who didn't. And they're going to come along him and make him a bad guy. When a new president comes in, it's just endless war and death and killing. Have you seen a dead body, Piers? Have you seen people lose a fucking limb? It's disgusting. I know what's happening over there.
Have you seen that?
I don't need to tell you about the parts of my history that I'm not prepared to share, Piers.
I
said it to Ben. I said people who have done their own fighting and seen their own violence and have seen people bleed out in the street from a stab wound are not going to be so smart and so quick to sit behind a desk and call for the death of innocent people. It's disgusting what's happening. I don't want anyone to die on either side. And when I come along as a peacemaker and say, this is insane, because he's a warmonger, because he has chosen blinkers and sees one side of the argument and refuses to accept the humanity of Palestinians, he says I'm a bad person for calling for peace.
Well, you know why? Because you'll probably listen to this interview and say, this guy can't even describe Hamas as terrorists.
If Ben Shapiro thinks that,
and if you don't think what happened to the people in Israel on October the 7th is an act of terrorism,
did I not just say?
Then you are.
I want all people.
Then
to
you are
stop
just.
dying.
You are just as partisan to one side as you believe Ben Shapiro is to the other.
Did I not just say I want all people to start dying? Stop dying. Piers, don't interrupt this. It's 2 sentences. I want all people to stop dying. However, I understand what is going to happen when you create a pressure cooker. That is my answer, and it's extremely professional. I don't want anyone to die, and because I don't want anyone to die, because I'm a peacemaker, because I'm a humanist, I understand you cannot lock people in an open-air prison for an undetermined period of time without provoking terrorism.
So out of interest, what would you have done if you'd been Israel after October the 7th?
That's a really interesting question, and I think there's people who are more qualified than me to answer.
Given that Hamas last week said, we're going to try and do the same thing again and again and again, what would you do to defend the people of Israel?
Good question. They have the Iron Dome, which is largely effective. I think that their border security is usually effective. It's very interesting that it wasn't on.
So you would say they would do nothing other than tighten up security?
I think if I was truthfully, I'll answer the question. If I was truthfully in charge of Israel, I would have found out how our border was penetrated. I would have made sure that was impossible to do. I would have had large conversations and discourse during that period, which would probably take weeks to ensure that my border was impenetrable because we were at no genuine threat of a repeat attack. And then I would make it clear that there will be some repercussion unless we can come to peace terms. I don't think
Hamas doesn't want peace.
Of course not. But I'm saying
that's their
fine.
stated position.
Of course.
So does it mean
okay,
peace
you're
with
asking
Hamas?
what I do. I would have found out. First things first. I'm a man. So first things first, you fix the problem. Okay, our border's been penetrated. How do we make sure that doesn't happen again?
Sure,
How did it happen? Internal investigation. Let's make sure the border's secure. Now our civilians are safe. Our civilians are safe, which buys us time. Let's have a conversation and see if we can actually reason with Hamas. If we can't, then there might be some military intervention.
Then what?
But there certainly wouldn't be bombing hospitals, cruise missiling refugee camps. There wouldn't be any of the things that's going on now. Absolutely
You
not.
wouldn't try and attack the people that
No,
did it.
because this is a rushed and emotional response. And that's what I would have prevented. I would have made sure as a man I didn't make a rushed and emotional response.
So you'd be more like Neville Chamberlain, trying to do peace with the Nazis and Winston Churchill trying to kill them.
Well,
yeah,
that's an interesting question.
You're an appeaser, not a warrior.
Well, I still think I'm a warrior, but I think that when you're a warrior, you have to be very capable and.
But that's what Neville Chamberlain's view was. We should do peace with the Nazis.
You have to be very understanding of your power.
You know what's so ironic about this statement? Andrew Tate has actually been in the ring and has actually fought people. And if you've ever heard him in previous, interviews, he's always said because he understands the gravity of fighting and war, it is always best to seek peace. Mind you, he's been a champion fighter. So, I mean, he's not a chicken to any extent of the imagination. But yet, look at Piers Morgan, who has no fighting experience whatsoever. He's trying to actually call out Andrew Tate and make him seem like he's just a pacifist. You are a appeaser. You're not a warrior. Isn't it so crazy how they try to flip the script? because a man is trying to advocate for peace?